Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 4 of the Pickle podcast. I'm your host, Zach Martin.
And I'm your host, Jeremy Driver.
And today we are talking about a topic very near and dear to both of us, something we use every day, something growing in popularity across the country among millions of adults. And what is that?
Are you talking about porn?
No. Well, marijuana.
Oh. I'm addicted to both of those anyway, so.
Oh my god. But more specifically, not our enjoyment necessarily of it, but how marijuana has been stigmatized and criminalized for nearly a century at this point in order to imprison mostly poor people and mostly minorities.
Right. But I think we should first talk about the history of hemp, as it's been used by humans for thousands of years, if not tens of thousands of years, and has only really been recently criminalized and seen as like a negative thing.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about like the material hemp, we're seeing like a lot of like stores pop up that sell like hemp clothing, health utilities, stuff like that. And that wasn't really a thing until very recently, even though we have been using it as material.
Well, as I'll talk about in a second, we should have been using hemp as a product for this whole time. So anyway, going back into the very beginning of the history of hemp, it's been a plant that's been used by people for industry as, you know, a textile or a fiber in productions of ropes for thousands of years. In fact, I think the first indication of hemp being used by humans was in 10,000 BC in Taiwan, and it was used in like pottery to support the clay. And again, it's been used for textile, rope, and even paper in lots of societies in Asia, and then it spread to Europe and other countries and continents. It was used as a medicine in Asia, and also it's heavily embedded in the religious and other culture in Asia, Japan, China, and India. But that has changed in recent times.
Yeah, so why is it that we kind of saw this shift away from hemp, considering it is grown super easily? I mean, it's called a weed because of how easily and how plentiful it grows, how easily it grows, and how strong it is as a material.
Well, I know that in the U.S., it was because of capitalism. And from capital greed.
Big surprise.
I know. So, in America, hemp has been grown really, really, really extensively, especially in colonial America. It was even a law to grow hemp. Everyone had to plant hemp. Like in most of the colonies, they had to plant hemp, and you were fined for not planting hemp. So it was a huge part of the economy and the culture in early America. So to see this shift from like it being so essential to the people living here, and even the American Indians, the Native Americans, they grew hemp a lot and used it for fibers and etc. So to see this huge shift from it being such a big part to a criminal offense to own it is kind of weird. So it was in around 1937 that they passed the Marijuana Tax Act that really kind of showed this turning point in the attitude towards hemp.
And this was before it was even considered like a drug or like a psychoactive substance of like concern, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was considered...
It was used.
Yeah, it was used medicinally. It was actually like, you know, how it is today, where pharmacists and doctors would prescribe cannabis to people for various things, and it was considered a medicine. And granted, this was during a time when like people would drink soda for medicine. So
that soda also had cocaine in it.
Right. Yeah. So like it was considered just a general medicine that no one really gave a shit about. Like it was a normal thing. But it was when William Randolph Hearst, he was a businessman and also newspaper publisher in the U.S., and he did not like hemp, as hemp was seen as a pretty cheap and sustainable and easy to grow crop that, like I had said, had already been established as a a really good replacement for paper pulp in the newspaper industry and like other paper. But this businessman, he really saw it as a threat because he had a bunch of holdings in lumber and to support his newspaper business. So he, along with the DuPont family and Andrew Mellon, got together and really pushed for the Marijuana Tax Act, which in fact was written by the DuPont lawyers. And they made it sound like marijuana was an addictive drug that made people violent and overdose. And funny enough, the person that owned the newspaper, Hearst, he started publishing articles that painted marijuana as something associated with degeneracy and madness, and also to Mexican immigrants, African Americans, and jazz artists.
Yeah.
So that's it. Really started this whole shift from marijuana and cannabis and hemp all being a good thing for the U.S., a good thing in general. People use it all the time. To growing and being stigmatized, and the hemp industry was destroyed after that.
And fast forward 15 or 20 years from then, and you have the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And a lot of protests came with that Vietnam War, of course, and the president at the time, Richard Nixon, didn't really like all that protest. And of course, you can't criminalize protesting.
No.
So what you're going to do is you're going to criminalize things the protesters like to do. And at the times, it was hippies and minorities and a lot of young people who were protesting the Vietnam War. One of their favorite things to do, smoke marijuana. So Richard Nixon introduced and signed the Controlled Substances Act of 1970 towards the end of the Vietnam War. And this placed marijuana at its highest scheduling that the law permits, and that's Schedule 1, alongside heroin, and more serious than drugs like cocaine and methamphetamine.
And side note, the Controlled Substance Act is what replaced the Marijuana Tax Act. It directly followed it.
So
yeah.
The DEA was founded shortly after the signing of the Controlled Substances Act, and after 50 odd years, marijuana is still at the same scheduling as it was back in the 70s, alongside much more serious, dangerous drugs like heroin. And this has had a completely negative and oppressive effect on who this legislation hurts the most, and that's low-income minorities, low-income African Americans, low-income white people too, but you mostly see the enforcement towards minorities, mostly young black males, or who you're seeing targeted the most for drug crime.
Yeah, I mean, currently our jail systems are completely and disproportionately filled with black people, almost, and a lot of them being charged with drug charges with marijuana.
Absolutely. Since around 1970, our prison population was around 200,000. It has now ballooned over 2 million. So, and a large majority of those people are in jail for drug possession and drugs and low-level drug offenses. And you have programs or legislation such as stop and frisk in New York under Mayor Bloomberg that had the effect of targeting specifically black young men and throwing them in prison. And it gets extra scary and sinister when you think about the history of the prison system. So, in case you didn't know, the federal prison system, as we know it, was not established in the United States until after the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment ended slavery in cases except for the incarcerated people. So, after we ended slavery as a country, the federal prison system started as a way to contain a lot of the new poor black people that were newly freed in America, and we have been successfully profiting off of their slave labor in the prison system. And the war on drugs was the most successful way to balloon the population of those prisons and target the widest amount of people possible engaging in a what's considered a degenerative activity, something that is considered to hurt communities, even though across different races, drug user rate is around the same. No race uses drugs any more than any other race, but black and brown people, and are significantly more likely to be incarcerated for it.
Well, this kind of sounds like there's still slavery in the U.S. and that it never really ended.
Absolutely.
And that it kind of found a loophole to remain legal.
We look towards all these terrible, like what we consider oppressive governments, whether it be Russia, China, Cuba, historically speaking, even Nazi Germany, which, I mean, Nazi Germany is, of course, way worse than the modern day U.S., but our incarcerated population blows all those nations out of the water.
Even per capita.
Absolutely. We have such a high rate of incarceration in this country, and then we use those incarcerated individuals to fuel and profit off a cycle of prison labor, private for-profit prisons, and then the criminal justice system that profits from the constant paperwork and legal cycles that these individuals are engaged in, mostly from a young age, where people by happen circumstance or by a materialist need to feed your family or do something that is considered illegal, and that could ruin someone's life at a very young age, and then get caught up in the system where you are just drained for everything you are worth, and then you are incarcerated, and you are prevented really from any social mobility from that. There are cases where, like in California, for example, incarcerated people can do great things in terms of prison labor. Like, they can become firefighters. They can they can have some very meaningful and serious jobs and activities. However, when they are released, they cannot use any of that experience. Like in California, felons are forbid from doing emergency service work, even though they can be unpaid for that labor while they're in prison, and then they can't use any of that experience, and they are screwed when they get out.
It's almost like the system is designed to keep people down and
Absolutely.
impoverished and at the bottom of society.
Absolutely. And yes, it's mostly poor people and mostly poor minorities. We saw this with the crack cocaine epidemic, where crack and cocaine are chemically the same drugs. However, one is in a crystal form and is used by a poorer majority, where cocaine is a powder. It is used by a lot of wealthier people, a lot of bankers up on Wall Street historically. But these are two drugs that had very different sentencing requirements and put people away for drastically different amounts of time for no reason other than them just being poorer.
Wow. I didn't know that. I had never even heard of that. I mean, I knew the difference between crack and cocaine, socially,
and then we can get into conspiracies that have some more decent backing than others about the government going into communities, planting crack, cocaine, and then trying to get lower-income communities addicted off the drug.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, some of that is definitely true.
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing that now with cops planting drugs on people who they just feel like arresting.
I mean, the whole war on drugs is, one part of it is just an excuse for, people in authority, like cops, to further bully people. It gives excuses for them to arrest people and assert their dominance.
Absolutely.
And it's really just a legal way to bully the population. Back
to stop and frisk, I mean, that's a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment, right? The idea that police can just stop you and their justification for why they could stop you is possession is insane, when ultimately that's not something that should be a concern to a police officer, especially when gun crime's the way it is, especially with our cities run the way they are. I mean, obviously I think there's need for drastic police reform that goes far beyond them needing to stop policing drugs the way they are.
Right.
But
There's large fundamental issues
Yeah,
wrong with the police force.
It's absolutely insane that this. I mean, we have not only the DEA that focuses entirely on drug crimes, but a lot of local police departments spend a vast majority of their time just banging up teenagers for simple weed possession and stuff like that. And it's not saving communities. Incarceration rates are going up, and drug use is staying at the same rate or similar rates. So there's no metric where any of this has been successful.
It's kind of almost like if you treat addicts, people that are addicted to hard drugs like meth or cocaine or crack or any other hard drug. It's like if we treat them as criminals, they stay addicts, and it's like it doesn't fix anything. It's strange. It's crazy.
Well, I mean, I have a problem with the way we just treat all criminals in general. So I don't think it's like, oh no, only the addicts should get actual rehabilitative treatment. I think everybody should get rehabilitative treatment, regardless of really what they have done.
Of course, but I think it definitely contributes to this phenomena that we treat criminals and addicts as these lesser people that are just terrible, horrible people in society that we want to consolidate into prisons and keep
absolutely.
them there.
I mean, we do the same thing with homeless people, and of course that's a pretty overlapping circle of addicts and homeless.
Right.
But yeah, we see that with the way we treat addicts, and in back to the homeless thing, like a lot of homeless shelters don't allow people to do drugs, which is a problem if you're an addict. So instead of having a safe place where they can do drugs safely and away from the elements or people who want to hurt them, then homeless people would rather stay on the street because that's where they can do drugs. And it's sad because that level of addiction that comes with a meth addiction or a heroin addiction or fentanyl addiction or whatever is so severe that you can't live without the drug. It becomes everything to you. You'd rather stay on the street and have drugs than go inside and not have drugs. That's a real problem, and it doesn't help with our approach being 2 years in a cell and then back on the street with nothing. It fails on every level to provide any support to the people most vulnerable.
I think the biggest thing is that we need to treat specifically addicts as people with mental health issues.
I mean, absolutely. I mean,
addiction is a mental illness. It is not. It shouldn't be a crime necessarily.
No, and I don't think drug possession on any level should be considered a crime.
Right. I mean, just look what
but we
Oregon did.
I mean, even if we do treat like addiction as like a mental health problem, we don't do a good job of treating mental health in this country.
No, not at all, and that contributes,
and that makes the problem worse. So
I mean, yeah, like the lack of like support and like a system to support people with mental health issues is probably what causes a lot of addictions in some cases.
Absolutely, and that's why you have countries like Portugal, like what we are seeing now pop up in small areas in California or Denver, Oregon, where drugs are being decriminalized at a much more effective level and scale. You're seeing this slowly with, I think psilocybin mushrooms are the next big step. But in countries like Portugal that have full drug decriminalization, they have clean needles you can get for free. They have full government support for addiction treatment. They have significantly lower rates of hard drug use and significantly lower rates of incarceration for violent crime. And I mean, like, they have significant rates for nonviolent drug crime because they don't consider it a crime. But what that allows communities and individuals to do is be healthier and safer, and then it is much more likely to prevent them from heading down downward spirals where drugs like such as heroin or more powerful things can grip a hold of people kind of, I guess, in that gateway area. But what it mainly does, it destigmatizes a lot of drug use, and when putting it out in the open and doing things like effectively diagnosing addiction as mental illness, I think it makes drugs less appealing.
Yeah.
I like heroin's a lot cooler when it's something you'll sleep out in the street because it's so good, I guess, more so than it being like a thing that will give you a mental disease.
Yeah.
Which I think if that's kind of the switch in the framing, that would be much more effective than like a DARE program per se. Just saying, no, it's bad because I will put you in handcuffs, which is what cops would do and come to schools. That's the punishment, is drugs are bad because you will get arrested. Not necessarily drugs are bad because of the long-term physical and mental toll they'll have in your body. And I think that's part of the problem with coupling and associating things like marijuana with heroin, is because if you're someone who smokes marijuana regularly, you're like, you know that it's not going to cause you like severe physical addictions. It's not going to put you out on the street. It's not going to ruin your life. It's not going to do any of those things. So when the same people who told you marijuana would ruin your life say heroin's going to ruin your life, that meth's going to ruin your life,
it's a kind of a ridiculous thing to trust them.
Yeah, why would you believe them? Because they're not the same thing.
No.
They aren't even close to being the same thing. The fact that we have alcohol that's legal and weed is still at the same schedule as something like heroin, what's the rhyme or reason to that equation? Why would somebody who doesn't know the research or kind of delve into the chemistry of it all, what's for them, what's to stop them from thinking that heroin it's like all drugs are the same and just drugs do different things? I mean, at a baseline level, when you're saying that marijuana and heroin are the same schedule, they're just two sides of the same coin, but they're not. And
like we said, the main causes for all this and the main like driving factor is racism in America and capital and corporate greed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the major preventative things from having marijuana legalization at a full-scale level in the United States is the hit that would do to the pharmaceutical industry. Because there's a lot of research that I've seen about marijuana being a pretty great mild pain relief alternative to pretty much every hardcore opiate drug that Purdue Pharmaceutical and Pfizer and every other large pharma company makes millions off of. Yeah. So you have a safer alternative that isn't going to get people addicted to things the same way that OxyContin did with Purdue and other things.
It's clearly they see it as a threat to their industry, that they want to stop the popularization of CBD, hemp, and cannabis.
Absolutely.
So they'll lobby against it and spread propaganda against it as well, as we saw in the past. With the Reefer Madness movement and the movement to make marijuana stigmatized and to be associated with crime and
I mean, that never went away, really. Like, there were those old commercials of the two dudes, like, smoking marijuana, and one of them's, like, sunk into the couch, and he, like, can't move.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is your braid on pot, or whatever.
I've seen another one that, like, it showed a kid, he got high, and he just suddenly decided he wanted to shoot someone.
Yeah. That's the real solution to the gun crisis. Is
marijuana.
No, we gotta stop smoking marijuana. It's making kids go crazy. But no, it is definitely a threat to the pharmaceutical industry, and a threat to, I think, a lot of the more normative drug consumption methods, even alcohol, really. Because if we see places like Colorado, Nevada, I haven't looked at their alcohol sales. I don't know if they would go up with the increase in marijuana sales, but these states and these counties are making thousands and thousands and millions of dollars off legal cannabis sales, and it's got to take some hit on another industry. I'm assuming alcohol and pharmaceuticals would be the two.
Yeah.
And those are two industries that are deeply ingrained with U.S. society.
Yeah, definitely. With lobbying.
I mean, imagine if like the U.S. treated like a marijuana prohibition the same way they treated the prohibition 100 years ago. Like that was like, that has just been like portrayed as like the Wild West when it came. Like nobody was actually like abiding by prohibition laws. Everyone was just smuggling. Everyone was in back doors.
I mean,
back bars.
That's what happens with marijuana currently.
I mean, yeah, but
not to the same extent, but
absolutely. But people who will fight against marijuana legalization and fight against the expansion would laugh if you tried to suggest taking away alcohol, which causes vastly more deaths a year, which is vastly more dangerous on a public level in terms of drinking and driving being significantly more dangerous than drinking under the influence of marijuana. There's a much better case to be made for alcohol prohibition than there is for marijuana prohibition. But anyone who fights currently against marijuana, I doubt is pro any form of alcohol prohibition, despite how they might claim to care about the safety of our children. They're still going to be fighting for gun laws too that protect Second Amendment rights and further mass shootings. So I don't think it has anything to do with really a community safety or safety of children's or preventing a dependency or a development towards harder drugs. It has to do with keeping the prison populations as filled as they are and being able to profit off of the cycles of incarceration that causes and keep communities from growing upward by incarcerating a majority of them.
And I think this is a serious problem with the U.S. I mean, what other country has as many prisoners as us?
None. No,
there are no other countries.
We double the country behind us, which is China. I mean, and the fact that a portion of our private our prisons are privatized is insane too. It's of course different in every state, but I think the highest Montana, like over 40% of their prisons or their prisoners are in private prisons, and Tennessee I know is in the top 3 for greatest portion of prisoners in for-profit private prisons.
So what are private prisons and kind of what do they mean?
So I'm by no means an expert, but to my understanding, private prisons are private companies that get contracted by the government to work as pretty much hotels for prisoners. And what that allows them to do is they try to minimize the cost as possible. And this comes, of course, to the detriment of the prisoner because they want to run for as low as cost as possible while keeping as many prisoners in there as possible. Because the more prisoners they get, the more money they're going to get from the government. So they basically take the per prisoner amount or whatever that the government gives them and then extract all the value they can, run the prison at a bare minimum, treat the prisoners like shit, and then they just take all the profit.
Sounds eerily similar to capitalism and slavery.
Well, it is capitalism and slavery. It is, and of course it's not as in your face because they're not like literally working on like a factory floor or something. I mean, sometimes they might be, but they're not working for. It's not like a company doing it per se, even though it is a private company doing it at the U.S.'s expense legally through a loophole in the 13th Amendment.
Well, it's under the guise of a prison.
Yeah,
it's an illusion. It's an illusion to have legal slavery.
And these people were paid cents on the hour, dollars a day for very demanding work, and it doesn't help them when they get to the on-site. It's not like they can build up money that or significant money that can be used on making sure that you are okay and have things taken care of when you get out of prison. It is very hard for people to develop skills that they can actually legally use when they get back into a workforce because of the regulation and laws around preventing felons from doing significant work, especially in the government sector. And of course, corporations don't really like hiring felons. I mean, there's programs and stuff that try to prevent that, but in general, it is very hard for convicted incarcerated people to find jobs once they get out, especially if they've been out for a long time. Like, people are getting out now who've never used like the internet or know how social media works.
Yeah.
Like, and they're trying to like find a job, and it's like, how, if you went to prison in 1989, how are you coming out in 2022 and like surviving?
That'd be incredibly difficult. I can't imagine going to. It's just like walking into a new world. You have no idea what's going on, and everyone is so far beyond you. Then what the fuck are you else? What are you gonna do?
Absolutely. I mean, I get mad at like grandparents who can't use like a phone or computer stuff because they've had this shit the entire time. I mean, they just refuse to learn. I mean, if you're a prisoner who's coming out for the first time, this is all brand new to you.
You've had no opportunity to learn.
No, and by a lot of accounts, it has been intentionally prevented you from learning this stuff to make it more likely that you will go back into prison and contribute further to the cycle of profit maximization and exploitation that prisoners go through.
And this is such a widespread issue in the U.S. I mean, there are massive prisons everywhere. Mm-hmm. We're struggling to find space to house how many prisoners we have.
I mean, yeah, our prison system is so vast and overly complicated. Like, they just send prisoners like all over the place, whether it be to state or federal prisons, private or public. None of them are run with the enough care that they probably need, nor are they run with the correct intentions. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, I'm much more for a rehabilitative approach to incarceration, more so than the punitive punishments that we currently draw, where we throw people in cells for 10, 15, 20 years.
And that's clearly not working.
Oh, you need this is you paying for your crimes or whatever. But how are they? How is society getting any significantly better from someone who did something wrong rotting in a cell?
No, absolutely.
I think society improves by us taking the time and care to rehabilitate people, to fix the underlying material problems that put them in that circumstance, to actually make our communities and society somewhat better. To do that at the cost of a prisoner is not a necessarily bad thing, but that prisoner, to make the society better, that prisoner is the one who needs to be rehabilitated and
because ultimately the goal is to put them back into society, or what should be the goal is to ultimately put them back into society as a functioning member of society.
Absolutely.
Which we like. I mean, most people. I mean, clearly, if you are a serial killer, maybe you shouldn't be put back into society. But for the vast majority of prisoners, they are not necessarily horrible, terrible people.
Absolutely. And this really comes down to my philosophy on crime, and that is, in the vast majority of cases, nobody commits a crime for no reason. Everyone has motives, and because of my view of the world, I believe all of those motives have a materialist basis. Yeah. So that crime is underlyingly caused by a failure in the materiality for you to be provided with the things you need. And you see that when the most significant predictor of crime is poverty level.
Yeah.
By far. Like, that is who commits crimes. I mean, a lot of that is because, of course, we've criminalized poverty in a lot of senses in this country. That's a entirely different topic. But nobody just goes around and commits crimes just for the fun of it, just because they want to get arrested or whatever. I do believe in the vast majority of cases it is due to some intrinsic material desire to just live your life the way you want to live it. And I don't mean that in like in a freedom sense. I mean that in a you have food sense. I mean that in you are fulfilled and you feel a part of your community. And even in like cycles of gang violence, it all comes from a disassociation between your community and a belief in the inability to improve your materialist standards through normative means.
So what you're saying is that if the government were to have a system in place where everyone could be able to have food to survive, a place to live, water, and places to sleep, that there would be drastically less crime because they wouldn't be...
I mean, absolutely. If you want to look at places like Norway, Sweden, the Scandinavian quote-unquote socialist countries that have large social safety nets that allow people to live off a basic standard of food, shelter, healthcare, you can then, in my opinion, kind of let the free market run wild, because that free market will no longer have a necessary power over the individual that requires them by threat of starvation, by threat of death, to work.
Right.
You can then allow companies to be more competitive in their wages and offer actual workers protection, because if it's not worth the workers' time outside of the threat of death, then that job just won't get employed or filled.
Yeah.
And that's why you see socialist Scandinavian countries have such a higher level of economic freedom, because true economic freedom comes when you are not spending every paycheck you have on food or rent.
Right.
Or you don't truly have the economic freedom to work a meaningful, fulfilling job because you are stuck at a job that is only there so that you can survive.
And I think this could easily start a conversation about the way we do healthcare in the U.S. and how it's tied to your job oftentimes.
Absolutely. I mean,
how other places that don't do that and have universal healthcare are doing way better on a lot of fronts.
The system is designed to keep you working.
Yeah.
And you can see that through how innovations made at the productivity level have not been shared with the workers. Workers are just told to work more and be more productive, but that increase in productivity, that increase in profits, is not given then to the workers or reflected in that they can work less. It's shown in the growth of corporations, in the growth of capital.
I mean, if companies really wanted their workers to be more productive, forcing them to work more and just putting them under shitty conditions is not going to work. What has proven to work is by giving them more benefits and paid leave and less work a week. I mean, there are countries that have 30-hour work weeks versus our country, which has a standard of 40-plus hours work weeks.
I mean, 40 hours is the standard.
Right, 40-hour work weeks. They're way more productive with a 30-hour work week.
I mean, companies are now starting to do either like half-day Fridays or no Fridays at all, just working Monday through Thursday. And companies that have made that switch are seeing an increase in overall productivity even though in less time workers feel compelled to work more. Workers are often happy to put in the more significant time and more significant effort if that work is then rewarded with more time off or better pay.
Yeah.
But it's not, because we've seen wages be stagnant while, let's see, back in whenever the minimum wage was established 40 years ago or whatever, CEO wages have gone up like thousands of percent while minimum wages stayed the same. And minimum wage jobs have only increased in their productivity. And minimum wage workers are only asked to do more than they have been, but they're being paid less.
I would go as far as to say that the modern workforce is under slavery in some form.
Oh, absolutely.
You're a wage slave. You like you said, you have to work to eat and to live in this country, and that vastly limits like what else people can do And like you were saying, I don't know what else to say there.
Slavery is when someone is forced to use their labor under the threat of death, of threat of punishment, or for some punitive measure. And in the United States, the average worker who doesn't have a backstock of capital, who doesn't have a retirement savings, who is, if you are just dropped into this world with nothing, which a lot of workers are starting out from nothing, you are forced to work, and if you don't work, you will not be able to eat. You will not be able to house yourself. You will not be able to live by any means a fulfilling life. And that is what slavery has turned into. I mean, slavery has taken different forms since its inception at the beginning of mankind. Whenever man first dominated other man, but it will change forms throughout human history, and we're seeing two forms of it, whether it be directly in the prison system, where it says by the letter of the law these people can be slaves and it is legal,
which is completely insane,
or by the capitalist slave sense, where people are only existing to contribute to wage labor and they are given barely enough to live, and they can't live meaningful, fulfilling lives outside of that because of the restrictions capitalism puts on them.
The U.S. really, really has a interesting history involving slavery, as it continues today.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
we seem to really, really like slavery.
Yeah. I think, was it Hitler who was... Or no, that was... cut that. But yeah, no, U.S. has had a very interesting and ongoing history with slavery, and I do think that neo-slavery is not an absurd idea.
No. And I think we need to grow as a country, we need to fundamentally change our systems and how we do things.
Absolutely.
Everything, almost everything, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's a top-down level. It's going to come down to how we organize the economy to not benefit workers. We only care about consumer-side economics and profit-side economics. So as long as numbers go up and consumers are happy, we don't care about how the sausage gets made. We don't care about how over half of this country is living paycheck to paycheck, unable to grow their life in a meaningful capacity.
I agree.
All right. And that's going to end this week's discussion of the war on drugs, a little bit of poverty, a little bit of economics talk.
And neo-slavery.
Neo-slavery, yes. And I think that's kind of the main idea I want to wrap this episode on, is that slavery is still a thing in the United States, and it has been used by the government and large corporations to keep poor people down, to keep poor minorities in prisons, to constantly have a unlimited supply of subservient workers that corporations pull from and pay low wages to, so that because they have to, because that's what they need to survive. And corporations are going to profit from that and exploit that in every way they can. And they're getting better at it.
I hate to see it, but it's true.
We do hate to see it. Thank you all for watching. We'll be back next week with another fun, spicy, probably current events episode. So stay tuned.
Thank you.